Hey, somebody needs to lock and load. You have? Excellent. Good morning, afternoon, or evening. You are listening to The Professional Noticer. Hello, everyone. I'm Andy Andrews. Hey, thank you for making me a part of your week. My purpose here today and with every show we do is to play the part of a best friend or a coach. I want to help you live the life of your wildest dreams by giving you access to the greatest mentors the world has to offer today. This week, The Professional Noticer is sponsored by wisdomharbor.com, a streaming service whose goal it is to create the next greatest generation. For less than $3 a month, you'll have access to original content found only on wisdomharbor.com that builds effective and influential relationships between adults and young people. Dave Ramsey says it's also good for your business and your teams. Utilizing video, audio, and the written word, content is delivered in small bites by Grammy winners, CEOs, comedians, master chefs, best-selling authors, and Hall of Fame speakers. There are even guitar lessons from an award-winning songwriter. So join wisdomharbor.com right now and become a part of the quest to create another greatest generation, starting with your family in your hometown. That's wisdomharbor.com. Observations and answers, that's what we do here on The Professional Noticer. And as you know, we love it when somebody comes to the table with both. Anytime we can get somebody that has observations and answers, that's very special. And we have that today in spades. And I want to be, I usually just lay out these intros, but I've got to make sure that I do this one correctly. All right. I don't want to miss anything. And so just know that our special guest today, so he's been over 20 years in naval special warfare. He's a Navy SEAL. And he transitioned from an enlisted SEAL sniper to a junior officer leading assault and sniper teams in Iraq and Afghanistan, to a platoon commander practicing counterinsurgency in the southern Philippines, to commanding a special operations task unit in the most Iranian-influenced section of southern Iraq throughout this drawdown of the U.S. forces. And he retired from active duty in 2016. I'll ask him about that because his first book came out in 2018. Retired from active duty in 2016, lives with his wife and 3 children in Park City, Utah. He is the #1 best-selling author, New York Times best-selling author of The Terminal List, True Believer, Savage Son, The Devil's Hand, and In the Blood. His 6th book, Only the Dead, right here, is released today. So rush. As soon as you hear this, as soon as you watch this, get to the bookstore or get to your computer and order Only the Dead. Jack, how are you doing? It's good to see you.
Great to see you. And you had Only the Dead there. This is the longest of the novels to date. And you can see right there, if you don't read it, you can use it as a blunt impact weapon or a doorstop. So it has multiple uses. And I didn't start off to write this as the longest. That's how long it took to create the best story I possibly could. And it's also the most brutal, though. Along with being the longest, it is the most brutal of the stories to date. So, yep. It's out today.
I got to say, I was going to ask if you had signed a new contract to be paid by the word, because this is pretty long. But as far as most brutal, I think your readers are going to be fine with that, because I think they see James Reese. I think they see his actions as very justified when he pulls that off. I am fascinated by this character. And I got to tell you, I read Terminal List when it first came out in 2018, but I really just began to be aware of Jack Carr a couple of years ago. I mean, I read the book and I thought, wow, this is a great book. But you know how you read a book and you kind of don't really pay attention to who wrote it until you find the second one and the third one. And man, you are on a roll. Was Terminal List a hit right out of the box?
I mean, I guess it depends on how you look at things, and I'll look at things from the publisher's perspective. And for them, yes, because it is so hard to, and I'm just repeating things here that they told me.
Yeah, sure.
Come up out of that industry. But breaking into this genre is extremely difficult. And when they see someone do that and actually make back their investment. So I understand it's very similar to the music industry in a lot of ways, but most books out there don't make back their initial investment. There are
Right.
books by people with last names that we all know, like Grisham, like Patterson, like King, that are making, essentially they're the Marvel movies for all the other books that don't make any money. Marvel movies are making all the money for a bunch of movies that are wonderful, but that no one really sees. And so very similar in publishing, but mine made back its investment right out of the gates and got traction. And they can look at those, they can look at sales and where it's selling and all that sort of a thing right out of the gate. So as long as the publisher's happy, that's always been my metric. People ask me, how many have you sold? Or what? I have no idea. I just know the publisher is extremely happy, and there's at least 2 more coming because I have a contract for 2 more. But so I guess it was successful out of the gate, and Chris Pratt certainly liked it. So that was nice that he optioned it in January of 2018 before it even came out. So I got it in his hands through a friend that I didn't even know knew Chris Pratt, that I happened to do a favor that I didn't even look at as a favor years and years ago. And he remembered it and called me back when he found out I was writing a book and wanted to thank me for what I did for him. And he just so happens to be great friends with Chris Pratt and gave him a copy as a thank you for what I did for him in the SEAL team. So certainly wasn't expecting that and didn't know that was even an option. But so I guess that's a very long way of saying that it gained traction out of the gate, and the books and the characters seem to be resonating, and I feel extremely fortunate.
Well, Terminal List is not only the name of your first book, but it's the name of the series on Netflix, which is #1 by any metric. It got almost 2 billion minutes of streaming views, like in the first hour or something crazy like that. But how excited were you that Chris Pratt was cast as James Reese? I mean, you've got Chris Pratt as your main character.
And that's who I wanted to do it. So I started this, I think I wrote the first words, I want to say in December of 2014. So I'd made the decision to get out of the SEAL teams. I was in a position where I wasn't going to be taking guys down range anymore. So I was the operations officer at BUDS, which is our SEAL training, basic underwater SEAL school, SEAL training. And so I had a chance to take a breath and look around, make the decision to get out, take care of my family. And I knew exactly what I wanted to do next, because it's always been what I wanted to do since I was a little kid. I wanted to serve my country in uniform, specifically as a SEAL, and then wanted to write these thrillers. So as a child of the 80s, it was very natural for me on the first or second sentence to choose the A-list actor who I wanted to portray my main character. And Chris Pratt was not an A-lister back then. He had been in Parks and Rec, where he played kind of an overweight,
kind of a doofus, yeah.
Yep. And then, but I saw his transition to a SEAL operator in Zero Dark 30. So I thought, this is somebody who can do this. I've seen him play something different. He's an actor that I think needs to do something different. And he seems like a genuinely nice person on and off screen. And I'm going to need someone like that because I need the audience to probably forgive a few things that he's going to do along the way here, because what I'm writing is particularly brutal. And so I decided Chris Pratt would star in my yet to be written novel, because I was on probably the second sentence. And then since I was choosing my main character, my A-list actor for my main character, I figured I should also choose the director. And I've always loved Antoine Fuqua. And so I'm like, Antoine will direct. And then I looked in the back of books by Brad Thor and Vince Flynn and saw them thanking someone named Emily Bessler at Emily Bessler Books at Simon & Schuster. And I thought, okay, well, Emily will be my publisher. And all that came true. Emily's my publisher, and Chris Pratt stars, and Antoine directs, and we're all executive producers on it, working on this together. So it's, so it felt great that Chris wanted it all those years later when I got the call from my buddy Jared Shaw, who wanted to give it. And Jared is an executive producer now on this spinoff series. He played Boozer last season, and he's a writer on this spinoff series as well. So we're all keeping it in the family, and we're all doing this together.
Man, I contrast that piece of happiness with the look that must have been on Lee Child's face when he found out who was going to play Jack Reacher. It's like Jack Reacher's 6'5", and Tom Cruise is 5'6", so this is going to work. So I am so happy for you. Well, and that series has been a phenomenon.
Well, I
I,
love
I
what Lee Child said about that. I saw him in an interview. I think it was on YouTube, and he said, "You know what? There are worse things in life than having one of the biggest movie stars in the world play your main character." And I thought
that's
that was,
true.
yeah.
That is so true. So were you born with the ability to write? Because you say 2 years before you left the SEALs, you decided you're going to write this, and were you born with that ability?
Well, I think it was the reading. So my mom was a librarian, so I grew up surrounded by books and a love of reading. Reading was as natural to me growing up as anything else. It wasn't something that was forced upon me. It was just very natural. And so was service. And those things kind of went hand in hand in that I knew I wanted to serve my country in uniform, specifically as a SEAL. And I think that was just innate. I think that was just in my DNA, in my blood. But also my grandfather had served in World War II. He was killed off Okinawa in 1945 near the end of the war. But I grew up with his medals, with his, he was a Marine aviator, flew the Corsair, which is the plane that had the gull wings that would fold up like that.
Right.
So you could put more of them on an aircraft carrier. I had pictures of him in his squadron, pictures of him with his plane, and the silk maps they used to give aviators back then. Because if you had a paper map and you hit the water, it would disintegrate, but a silk map just got wet, still worked. So I had all those things. And then there was a show on TV called Black Sheep Squadron, which was a show about Pappy Boynton, Marine Corps aviator, who flew the Corsair, portrayed by Robert Conrad. And I got to randomly meet both Robert Conrad and Pappy Boynton before Pappy Boynton passed away. And that was my dad. From me and my dad, it was kind of a touch point with that generation, because you couldn't get online and through a Facebook group find someone who served with your grandfather or served with your father. Those guys got back from World War II and got back to work. So through these movies and that television show in particular, that was our touch point with that generation. So that was kind of my introduction to the military, was through the medium of popular culture. And then I would start, we had a series of encyclopedias. So I'd always go and read things on World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam. I was reading everything I possibly could. And then I found out about SEALs when I was 7. And my mom took me down to the local library and we started doing research, because she was a librarian, still is. And back then you could read almost everything written about special operations in the early 80s, mid 80s. Today, you can start researching something and then never stop with the amount of information out there on anything. But back then, there was a finite amount of things written on it. So that research, found out that SEALs were some of the top special operators in the world, and the training was some of the toughest ever devised by a modern military. So I was in. But once I got to the end of the 1980s internet, also known as the library, I started reading the things that my parents were reading. So by age 10, 5th grade, that's when I start transitioning from young adult fiction to the same kind of fiction my parents are reading. By 6th grade, for sure, I'm reading those kind of books. So books by Tom Clancy, Nelson DeMille, A.J. Quinnell, J.C. Pollock, Mark Olden, David Morrell, Louis L'Amour, Stephen Hunter, all these guys who had protagonists with backgrounds that I wanted in real life one day. So typically the 80s action hero on TV, on screen, or on a book had been a SEAL in Vietnam, had been Army Special Forces in Vietnam, had been a Marine sniper in Vietnam, CIA paramilitary in Vietnam, and now in the 80s they were a private investigator, or they were a cop, or whatever they were. So I was reading all these books, and just the magic in those pages really made an impact on me, and I knew that one day I'd write those same kind of novels. So what I was doing, even though unbeknownst to me at the time, was that I was giving myself an early education in the art of storytelling by reading all those books from the masters during a time where I hadn't yet built up a lot of cynicism that comes with experience and age. It was just doing them for what they were, enjoying that magic, and knew that one day I'd write those same type of novels. So I came at it from the fan perspective. And I think it would be a lot more difficult if you just woke up one day and decided, oh, I want to give this writing thing a try. What should I have been reading for the past 30 plus years?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And that wasn't the case.
I tell, people ask me, they say, what should I do? I want to write. And I say, read. You got to read. I mean, for one thing, to recognize good writing when you see it, and bad writing when you see it. And to be able to do that, I think is, it's an honorable job, and so when you look at what you did, the reading obviously is a big point. Do you think that now is talent or discipline a bigger deal in your writing?
Well, both. You have to you have to get the job done. You can have all the talent in the world and never finish a manuscript if you're not disciplined enough to do it. There are a lot more distractions these days, certainly. But yeah, you have to have a combination of both there, and eventually you have to get it done. There's only a certain number of books you can read on how to do something before you actually have to commit and execute.
Right.
It's going to be different for everybody, whether it's one book or two or zero or 10 or 50. It's going to be different for everybody, but eventually you got to execute. You got to do the thing you want to do, and studying how to and actually do.
I think it was Savage Son. That was your third one.
Yep.
Was that the one where you went to Siberia, or where I say you? It's where James Reese went to Siberia.
Yes, and yes. He
I
did.
love that one, and I was curious. How did you research that? I mean, because obviously it wasn't Encyclopedia Britannica.
Yeah,
Because
so I went there. I went to Kamchatka Peninsula, Russia, just south of Siberia. But Savage Son was the one I wanted to start with. So when I started, I wrote down 6, 7, 8, 9 different ideas, different one-page executive summaries, laid them all out on the table. And the one I wanted to start with was Savage Son, because I read The Most Dangerous Game back in 6th grade, which is a short story by Richard Connell, written back in the early 20s. And I knew even back in the 6th grade that one day I would write a thriller that paid tribute to that short story. And that's Savage Son. But I also knew that I couldn't start with that one because the characters weren't developed enough to explore the theme of that novel, which is the dark side of man through the dynamic of hunter and hunted. And I had to come out with something that introduced readers to the character. And that was the Terminal List. It was very clear that that one was going to be the first one to introduce these characters. And then even at the end of that one, still, they weren't developed enough to explore the theme of Savage Son. I had to take him on a journey of violent redemption, and he needed to learn to live again, needed to find his next mission in life, his next purpose in life. And that was True Believer. And then at the end of True Believer, then it was time to explore Savage Son. But because Siberia and Kamchatka, south of Siberia, was such an important part of the story, I knew I had to get over there. I'd gone to Mozambique for the second novel for True Believer, even before I had a deal with Simon & Schuster. Before I'd even sent the first novel to Simon & Schuster, I was already writing the second novel, because I remembered the story about John Grisham, who wrote A Time to Kill first, and then he couldn't give that novel away. Then he wrote The Firm, and that one takes off. Tom Cruise is in the movie. Then they go back, republish A Time to Kill. Matthew McConaughey stars in that one. So I always thought, well, what if he stopped after that first one and he'd still be practicing law today? He'd still be he'd have a corner office probably and be a partner somewhere, but he wouldn't have done what he loved, which is writing. And so I always knew I was going to write two. And so I was already on a plane to Mozambique before I'd even submitted the first novel to Simon & Schuster. But it was so important to put boots on the ground in Mozambique because it was such an important part of the story. I went over there with all sorts of notes and questions and what to add. How can you say these certain things in different dialects? And it ended up adding so much flavor to the story. I knew I had to do the same thing with Savage Son and go to Kamchatka, Russia. So that's what I did. Put boots on the ground over there. And it's once again, it added to the flavor of that novel.
You know, I got to say, the audio versions of your books they're without error. That I mean, nothing bugs me worse than listening to an audiobook and hearing somebody mispronounce an easy word. Because I do that, and I sit in with the producer, and they're reading along, and occasionally I'll screw something up. He'll go, oh, so let's do that, and so I wonder, how does this happen? You know, I was listening to one the other day where the guy referenced. Well, I'll tell you what it was. It was the new book out that's The Wager, and it's about the ship that went down. And so he references Lord Byron's poem Don Juan, and twice in the audiobook he says Don Juan.
Oh,
and I'm
that's tough.
How does somebody not catch that? You know, I heard one the other day where the lady said, and small talk was not her fort.
Oh, it's so brutal. It's tough. But and it takes you out of the story.
Whoever's doing yours and producing them, I mean, that's how I'm taking
Oh,
in your
thank
stuff.
you. Thank you. Yeah, it's Ray Porter, the narrator, and I'm a reader. I read a physical book, but audio is the fastest growing segment of publishing. So when it came time to find a narrator for that first book, Simon and Schuster sent me an email and said, "Hey, what do you think about this guy?" And I listened to it, and I was like, I don't think he's quite right. But I didn't have that audio background the same way I have the reading background when we're talking about books and publishing and stories in this genre. And so I said, "Well, can I choose somebody else?" And they said, "Yeah, just let us know by the end of the day." And I was like, "Oh, that's like an hour." So
Yeah.
I jumped on to Audible, and I started listening to those little 30-minute second or 2 minute, whatever it is.
The samples. Yeah.
So I started listening, and then through a nonfiction, I found Ray Porter, and I said, "Oh, this could be the guy." And then I went to the other books by him and listened to those samples and thought, "Oh, this guy could pull it off." And then I wrote back to Simon and Schuster and said, "How about Ray Porter?" And they said, "Well, we can ask him." And what I didn't realize at the time is there are essentially like two guys that are at the top of the pyramid as far as narrators go. And Scott Brick and Ray Porter. And I had no idea. And so they asked him, and he said yes. And now we're dear friends, and he's amazing. And the first book was up for an Audible, which is like the Oscars of the audiobook community.
Yeah.
So we went to New York and put on the bow ties and tuxedos and went to do all that. And it didn't win. Ruth Ware won that year, but it was still up there, not even out for a year yet. And it's up there with Stephen King and Ruth Ware, and there's Terminal List, and I'm there with Ray, and we got to have some drinks together and get to know each other. And he just does a fantastic job. He's a Shakespearean trained actor and is just amazing. So that's a long way of saying I got extremely lucky with my one, that I just picked him out of the blue because I liked his voice, and two, that he happened to be at the pinnacle of this narration pyramid. And people follow narrators now from project to project
Yes, they do.
Yeah, it's really amazing. And I didn't know that about the audio world, but it makes sense. It's the fastest growing segment of publishing. It's very natural for people who listen to podcasts, I think, to then go to an audiobook because they're already involved in that medium already. So it's fantastic. And I couldn't be more pleased and thankful to Ray for doing that.
I know that you're involved in several veterans organizations, and one of them has to do with your middle child. Correct. So tell us about that, and how can we help with these?
So kind. So our middle child is he has a global developmental disability, meaning he needs a lifetime of full-time care 24/7. So that was one of the main reasons for getting out of the military. My family needed me. My wife had been taking care of him for all those years when I was training and going down range, where my focus is on the guys and the mission, because that's how it has to be. That's what responsible to not just those guys, your right and left, your best friends, your teammates, but their families, the country, the mission, and that pendulum was on that side for sure. But I knew once I got back from my last deployment, that would be the last time that I would tactically maneuver guys on the battlefield again. If I came back, I'd be more of an operational level leader. If you come back as a commanding officer, it sounds very impressive, but in today's military, you're back in a tactical operations center and you're allocating those assets, just the way I talked about Simon and Schuster doing earlier, but now you're allocating AC-130s and Reapers and Helos and whatever else is out there, QRFs, if you have multiple missions going on the battlefield in one evening. So I knew it was time to get out, and I knew my path. I knew I wanted to write. But it was really all about that mission of taking care of our middle child. So a lifetime of full-time care is, if you think about it, is quite expensive. So that's the mission, taking care of him, but the passion is writing. So I got to combine those two things to give me purpose going forward. So Rescue 22 is one of the organizations that I'm involved with, and they train up service and support dogs for veterans dealing with post-traumatic stress and traumatic brain injury, and physical injuries as well. But had them train up a service dog for our middle child, and it's become a great family dog for all. But there's so many wonderful organizations out there, Boot Campaign. There's so many wonderful veteran organizations out there these days that help people that are going through this transition from the military, transition into learning how to live a life without a limb, or to manage or live with, or figure out how to deal with post-traumatic stress and traumatic brain injury. And there's so many organizations out there these days. So I try to help out wherever I can.
That's awesome. That's awesome. We have what we call books for veterans, and we just finished giving 10,000 books to the VA, and so we're going to reset our goals and get going again. But you're right. There are a lot of organizations out there that are worthy of supporting, and I don't think we can do without any of them. Jack, how can we help you? What can what can we do for you with the responsibilities that you have, with the passions that you have, and how can we help you sell books? How can we help you spread whatever word you want spread?
Well, I sincerely appreciate that. And that's why I primarily use social media as a way to say thank you. Well, one, I want to add value to people's lives throughout the year. So as much effort goes into any sentence that I put on Instagram or Twitter as goes into any sentence in a blog post or any sentence in the novel, because people have trusted me with their time, and that's time they're never going to get back. So it's something I take extremely seriously. But I try to use social media as a way to say thank you, because I sincerely appreciate people who took a risk on me as a new author and then told a friend, whether it was at work or it was on social media, to their 5 followers or their 5,000 followers or whatever it might have been, or around the dinner table, water cooler, whatever it might have been. I sincerely appreciate that. So I try to say thank you to everybody, or hit that heart button at Jack Carr USA. That's my Instagram and Twitter, and people can go on there. And I try to get back to everybody at the end of the day, because it is something I think about so often, and then why I put so much effort into every single thing that I do, because I appreciate people trusting me with their time, and that is time they're never going to get back. So I think about that quite a bit. But people, and that's why that these books are what they are, is that people did take that risk, and they did tell a friend, or they did tell a family member, and that person in turn told someone else. So it was a grassroots, and I didn't look at it as a campaign, but that's, I guess, what it is a grassroots campaign. And the books hit the New York Times list before I was on Joe Rogan, before I was on Tucker Carlson, before Chris Pratt posted anything to his 30 plus million followers about the TV show. And I love that none of those people had me on and did anything until it hit the list, because it made that foundation, that grassroots effort of people just talking and sharing, so much more powerful. And I just love that it turned out that way. Now, at the time, I'll tell you, I was like, gee, I hope Chris posts about this soon, or why hasn't Tucker had me on, or why hasn't Rogan asked me? But now I am so glad that none of those guys activated their audience until after the book hit the New York Times list. So for that, I'm extremely grateful. I'm extremely grateful for every podcast person who has had me on, host that has had me on, every AM radio person who has had me on, anyone who shared on their social media the book and said, I had such a good time reading this, you should check it out too. I'm just sincerely thankful to every single person who has been a part of this journey.
Well, buddy, I think that not only will our viewers and listeners go and get the book, I think they'll all be united in a new vision of Jack Carr, just a nice guy, and a dad, a husband with that takes serious his responsibilities, and we all appreciate that, and we appreciate the service you've given to our country, buddy. So thank you so much for joining us, and we will be watching and available to help anytime we can.
Oh, thank you so much. Sincerely appreciate it. It goes both ways. Need anything, please reach out.
Thanks.
Take care.
I'm Andy Andrews, the professional noticer, harnessing common sense and wisdom to plow through challenges all the way to an answer for you. And I think that'll do it for this week. Get us out of here, Matthew. So, ladies and gentlemen, and to the boys and girls who aspire to become ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the end of another episode of The Professional Noticer. In a world where common sense has become a superpower, I'm harnessing that tiny bit of mental energy I have for you, seeking wisdom, making observations, and endeavoring to answer tough questions in a way that will empower your family and your business. I'm Andy Andrews. Until next week, goodbye. This episode of The Professional Noticer was produced by Matt Limpert. The Noticer theme, written and performed by Sugarcane Jane. Night vision for the cast and crew provided by Twinkle and Smoke of Beverly Hills. Additional financial consideration provided by thedehydratioonstation.com. Do you ever find yourself weighted down with essentials? You need it, you just can't carry it all. If this is ever you, let us help. We are thedehydratioonstation.com. At thedehydratioonstation.com, we've developed a patented chamber system for dehydrating almost anything, fruits and vegetables or a snap. even meats of all kinds are easy to deal with, you can turn a 3-pound roast into a 9-ounce disc the size of a hockey puck in just 2 hours. For only $499, our Liquiliminator 5000 can be yours. Find for home or office, plug it in, and you're ready to get creative. Do you carry your lunch to work? Put sandwiches in the chamber, and in 4 minutes, they are dehydrated and weigh a fraction of what they did only a moment before. You can dehydrate anything: cheese, banana pudding, butter, bacon, stroganoff, eggs, gravy, soups, even hard candy. When you're ready to eat, just add water. And for those of you who carry bottles of water everywhere you go, wouldn't it be easier to dehydrate that water and lighten your load until you need it? When you do, just add water and you're good to go. So order now. That's the Liquiliminator 5000 from thedehydrationstation.com.